Hello, welcome, dear friends, to another session on Indian polity. We know that India is the largest democracy in the world and we have the longest constitution in the world. So, while we talk about the constitution, please remember that it is the longest as far as the whole sovereign states of the whole world is concerned, and it contains as many as 1,45,000 words. When compared to other constitutions, say for example that of America or Britain, it happens to be very, very long. And there are many reasons for this longest nature of the Indian Constitution. Of course, there are other reasons too, because we have borrowed extensively from other constitutions of the world. One reason why it has become the longest. Another reason worth mentioning in this context is that we have amended our constitution several times since it came into force on 26th January 1950. So ever since it came into being or came into force, our constitution was amended several times. Of course, we know the first amendment of the constitution took place in 1951 when Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister of India. And the last amendment of the Indian constitution took place in January 2020, extending reservation of seats to members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in Lok Sabha as well as the states of the Union of India. Originally, the constitution contained only 395 articles divided into 22 parts and 8 schedules, whereas today, as of today, we have 448 articles divided in 25 parts with 12 schedules. Today, what I am proposing to do is to introduce the concept of the procedure for the amendment of the Indian Constitution. And while we talk about the length of the Indian Constitution, please bear in mind that more than 200 members, which formed part of the Constituent Assembly, they sat for drafting the Indian Constitution for nearly 3 years. To be very precise, they spent some 2 years, 11 months and 18 days for the entire drafting process under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So let us now discuss briefly the procedure for the amendment of the Indian Constitution. As we know, this provision for the amendment of the Indian Constitution is contained in Article 368 of our Constitution. Let us have a close look at the various steps involved in this procedure of amending Indian Constitution. The bill for the amendment of Indian Constitution can originate in either house of the Parliament. I mean, either the lower house called the Lok Sabha or the upper house called the Rajya Sabha. But remember that such a bill can never originate in any of the state legislatures. It can originate only in either house of the Parliament, Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. And regarding the introduction of such a bill, it can be introduced by either a minister in the Council of Ministers at the center or by any private member. So once the bill is moved or initiated by either a minister or a private member, it must be passed in each house separately by a special majority. We will discuss this concept later in some detail while we come to the 3 ways in which Indian Constitution can be amended. So it must be passed in each house separately by a special majority. What do you mean by special majority? Special majority refers to the majority of the total membership of the house. See, if it is 540 in the Lok Sabha, a majority, a simple majority of that number is required, plus majority of 2/3 of the members present and voting. This is called special majority. And as I told you already, in the case of a disagreement between the two houses of the parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, there is no provision for calling or convening a joint session of the two houses to discuss the matter. There is no such provision here. In amending the articles pertaining to the federal provisions, because we know that India is described as a union of states and there is a clean, neat division of powers between the center and the states. And, there are certain provisions which are, emblematic of the federal nature of our constitution. So, those articles which pertain to the federal provisions of the constitution, if they are to be amended, we must know one important fact, that it should not be passed simply by both the houses of the parliament separately, but it must also be ratified by at least half the number of the states under the Union of India. The bill, after passing in both the houses of the parliament, will be sent to the president for his assent. And the president is bound to give his assent. He cannot withhold his assent to the bill passed by both the houses of the parliament, or he cannot return the bill for reconsideration. And this clause was added, that the president is bound to give his assent to the bill once it is passed by both the houses of the parliament, was introduced through the 24th Amendment of the Indian Constitution. After getting the assent of the president, the bill becomes an act. And generally it is referred to as a Constitution Amendment Act. And we have the 104th Constitution Amendment Act, the last amendment which was brought into effect in January 2020. In short, from this discussion, we can say that there are three ways in which our constitution can be amended. Let's have a close look at the three ways in which our constitution can be amended. The first is amendment by a simple majority. And this kind of, an amendment does not come under the purview of Article 368 per se. It is used mainly for ordinary legislation. Or lawmaking. Say, for example, for amending articles pertaining to the establishment of new states, alteration of areas or boundaries or names of states, abolition or creation of legislative councils in the states, these are all matters which come under the first category, called where an amendment can be brought into effect through a simple majority. So generally this first category applies to making of ordinary laws. Now let's have a look at the second way of amendment, which is referred to as by special majority. I have told you about special majority earlier. Please remember that majority of the constitutional provisions come under this second category, because Article 368 applies here with all its power. A special majority applies in voting only during the third stage of reading of the bill. Please remember, only during the third stage of the reading of the bill in the houses of the parliament. And what are the provisions what are the provisions of the constitution that come under the second way of amendment? Say, provisions relating to fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, and also those provisions which are not covered in either of these cases, fundamental rights or directive principles of state policy, are the ones which come under the second category, called where the amendment should be passed by a special majority. Okay, the third method of amending the Indian Constitution is uh, amendment by special majority plus ratification by half the number of Indian states. As I have already mentioned, India is described as a union of states, and there is a clean division of powers between the center and the states. And Indian Constitution envisages a very powerful, strong federal structure in force. And those provisions which pertain to the federal provisions or federal aspect of our constitution, in order to amend them, we need special majority plus ratification by at least half the number of the states under the Union of India. And the provisions, or we can cite examples relating to these provisions as the provisions pertaining to the election of the President of India, and defining the extent of the executive powers of the Union and the states, and also the matters relating to the Supreme Court and the High Court, etc. So please remember, there are three ways in which we can amend the Constitution. By a simple majority, we can make ordinary laws, and by a special majority, we can make amendments. And the third category is by special majority plus ratification by at least half the number of states which form the part of the Union of India. That's all about the procedure for the amendment of the Indian Constitution. We will be back with another lesson next time. Till then, bye.